Welcome back to Ghost Pirate Entertainment. I'm your host, Kanan Becker, and today we talk about 10 of the greatest sci-fi horror movies of all time. So before we get into this, just remember this is my list. It doesn't mean it's the best list, it's just simply mine. But I would love to see down in the comments your list. What is your top favorite sci-fi horror movies of all time? What are the ones that I missed? Because I'd love to make a part 2 if this one does well. And with that, let's get to the list!
What will happen to me if I fail your test?
Ex Machina is a 2014 sci-fi horror movie, written and directed by Alex Garland. It stars Domhnall Gleeson, Alicia Vikander, and Oscar Isaac. When a programmer at a tech company wins a contest that enables him to spend the week at the estate of the CEO, he learns that he has been chosen to be the human component in a Turing test to determine the capabilities and consciousness of a beautiful robot. However, it soon becomes evident that the robot is more self-aware and deceptive than they could have ever imagined.
This building isn't a house. It's a research facility. And I want to talk to you about what I'm researching.
This is a movie that's aging like fine wine, because as more and more time goes by, it just becomes more and more relevant. Because with all of the advances lately with AI, it's just incredible how many things in this movie it talks about that are absolutely relevant right now. And the sci-fi fantasy elements of this movie just seem to be giving way to reality. But this is an expertly done movie in every way. It is absolutely gorgeous. The pacing is phenomenal. The story and all of the things that it talks about, there's so many layers to it. It's also exciting, intense, and absolutely savage at the end. I think this movie is incredible and definitely one of my favorites. A Quiet Place is a 2018 post-apocalyptic sci-fi horror movie. Directed and starring John Krasinski, it also stars Emily Blunt and Millicent Simmons. The plot revolves around a mother and father who struggle to survive and rear their children in a post-apocalyptic world inhabited by extraterrestrial creatures. So in my opinion, every now and then you get a movie that doesn't just entertain you, but actually leaves its mark and absolutely changes the game in one way or another. And this could be argued, I know not everybody enjoys this movie, but for me, the way that this movie approaches the intensity with no sound, and the way sound in general is used in this movie just feels groundbreaking, unique, and definitely left its mark, at least in my opinion, on the horror sci-fi world. And a big criteria for me for a movie to be on this list is it needs to be equal parts sci-fi and horror. This one really toes the line. I've heard many people argue one way or the other if it's sci-fi or horror, and for me the only answer is that it's really down the middle. It is very much both, because the sci-fi fantasy elements are strong in this. The way the creatures look, the design, the story behind them is fantastic. But also the horror, the intensity, just on the edge of your seat elements, the fact that they kill certain individuals, not to spoil this movie in case you've never seen it, but nobody is safe in this movie, and the way they handle that just is absolutely horrifying. I think this movie has definitely left its mark on the sci-fi horror world and absolutely deserves to be on my list.
The Terminator.
The Terminator is a 1985 sci-fi action horror movie. Directed by James Cameron, it stars Arnold Schwarzenegger, Linda Hamilton, and Michael Biehn. The plot's about a human soldier that is sent from 2029 to 1984 to stop an almost indestructible cyborg killing machine that has been programmed to execute a young woman whose unborn son is the key to humanity's future salvation.
Sarah Connor?
Yes.
Sarah Connor, 35, brutally shot to death in her home.
You're dead, honey.
So I've heard it argued most of my life that this is not a horror movie by a lot of people. They say it's straight up sci-fi. I don't agree, not at all, because I feel like this is actually as much horror as it is sci-fi. This is straight up a slasher. It's a cyborg running around killing people instead of a Michael or Jason or Freddy. But the way it's shot, how dark it is and creepy and just absolutely intense, really to me feels very horror. But I think no matter what you may feel about it, most people still think this is a badass movie. That's one thing that's not argued. It's just incredible, and it really was the beginning of Arnold Schwarzenegger's action career. And if you're a fan of Arnold, there's a really cool documentary over on Netflix that just spotlights his life and talks about all the different things. He's really an open book. It's really impressive on how honest and open he is about everything in his life. But this also jump-started the career of James Cameron, who's gone on to do countless amazing movies. This is just an iconic movie in every way and one of the greatest of all time.
The Blob.
The Blob is a 1988 sci-fi horror movie, directed by Chuck Russell and is a remake of the 1958 film of the same name. It stars Kevin Dillon, Shawnee Smith, and Jeffrey D. Munn. The story is about a deadly entity from space that crash lands near a small town and begins consuming everyone in its path. Panic ensues as shady government scientists try to contain the horrific creature.
The organism is growing at a geometric rate. By all accounts, it's at least 1,000 times its original mass.
So as much as I love the original 1950s version, just this one takes it to a whole nother level. That movie was fun in a lot of ways, but it was much more sci-fi, didn't have much in the way of horror in it. This, on the other hand, is very horrific. The special effects, the way they were able to make things look so real and absolutely disgusting with this blob is still to this day amazing. It really holds up. I just really enjoy how this movie feels like those 1950s sci-fi movies mixed with 1980s horror. It really is that perfect blend that makes it an absolutely fun watch. On top of all that, I think this movie is criminally underrated. It's just never talked about when people talk about the greatest 80s horror sci-fi movies. And I'm not sure why that is. I think maybe it's time for a rewatch. Maybe more people need to go back and watch this movie, because if you do, I think you'll be pleasantly surprised how entertaining and absolutely savage this movie is.
We're being cornered.
In a modern masterpiece of science fiction.
They're barricading the street.
Invasion of the Body Snatchers.
Invasion of the Body Snatchers is a 1978 sci-fi horror movie. Directed by Philip Kaufman, it stars Donald Sutherland, Brooke Adams, and Leonard Nimoy. The plot involves a health inspector and his colleague, who over the course of a few days discover that humans are being replaced by alien duplicates.
It's got no detail, no character. It's unformed.
All of a sudden, they're growing like parasites. Is it contagious? People are being duplicated.
This is another one that I think is underrated and absolutely holds up so well. It's incredible. A big part of it is this cast. Their performances are about as good as you can possibly get. It just gets so intense, and there's so much mystery, things that are just timeless. The dialogue and the way things feel absolutely real. These feel like real people trying to deal with the most intense, insane situation you can imagine. But at its core, the anxiety and mistrust of each other is what makes this movie just shine, because you just never know who might have been replaced. So it keeps you on the edge of your seat. It's just a great movie. The directing, the pacing, the shot selection, just everything about it is a masterclass in how to make a film. So without a doubt, I think this is one of the greatest sci-fi horror movies, period. Predator is a 1987 sci-fi action horror movie. Directed by John McTiernan, it stars Arnold Schwarzenegger, Carl Weathers, and Bill Duke. It's about a team of commandos on a mission in a Central American jungle who find themselves hunted by an extraterrestrial warrior.
There was a firefight. They were shooting in all directions. There's something out there waiting for us. And it ain't no man.
This is such a badass movie. This, to me, is my favorite Arnold Schwarzenegger performance. He's just got all the things you want in an action star in this. Even his cheesy humor and one-liners, I think, work in this. It just has all the elements that, for me growing up, made it one of my absolute favorite movies. Because the action, everybody looks badass, the equipment and the way things are shot, and yet here comes this creature that just absolutely mows these guys down. And these are the best of the best, special ops, black ops, the best soldiers that you could possibly get, and it just destroys them. So that it just ultimately leads to this showdown of the most badass soldier against the most badass alien warrior you can get. It has all of the things I could want in a sci-fi horror movie. So when I was putting this list together, this one was a no-brainer.
Help me. Please, help me.
The Fly is a 1986 sci-fi horror movie. Directed and co-written by David Cronenberg, it stars Jeff Goldblum, Gina Davis, and John Getz. The plot focuses on a brilliant yet eccentric scientist who begins to transform into a human-fly hybrid after one of his experiments goes horribly wrong.
Something went wrong, Seth. When you went through, something went wrong. Those weird hairs that were growing out of your back, I had them analyzed. But they were definitely not human.
If you've watched this channel for any length, you know that I'm a huge fan of David Cronenberg, and his son Brandon is starting to do a lot of the same things with his movies. But this movie, I think, is arguably David Cronenberg's best film. It has everything that I love about the way he makes movies, but then on top of all of that, it really leans into the sci-fi horror elements more than a lot of his. It doesn't quite have the weird esoteric things that a lot of his movies has. Instead, it's much more grounded, but it still gets disturbing, creepy. There's so much disgusting, just hard to watch imagery in this movie. But on top of that, you have to mention Jeff Goldblum in this, as well as Gina Davis. Their performances are so believable, so real in so many ways. You really feel their love for each other, but you also feel that heart-wrenching, this ending of this movie is just so fucked up in so many ways. But I think it's beautifully done in the most savage way possible. This is without a doubt one of my all-time favorite sci-fi horror movies. It epitomizes that genre in so many ways, and 100% one of the greatest ever made. Alien is a 1979 sci-fi horror movie, directed by Ridley Scott and written by Dan O'Bannon. It stars Sigourney Weaver, Tom Skerritt, and Harry Dean Stanton. The plot's about a crew of a commercial spacecraft who encounter a deadly life form after investigating an unknown transmission.
That crap's gonna eat through the hull.
I've had this movie on so many different ones of these best of lists, but that's because it fits so well on all these different lists. It's really a movie that is absolutely diverse and in different subgenres that it fits in, because it has one of the best creatures. It's one of the best alien horror movies. It's definitely one of the best horror movies. It has some of the best sci-fi you can ask for. On top of that, it also has the best, or at least arguably the best, survivor final girl in Ripley. It's just got all these different elements that make it incredible. And when you do these lists, it's hard to take a movie like this and not put it as your top pick. And you'll see when we get there why it didn't make it. But To me, there's only a couple movies ever made that I would put above this because it has every element that you want from a horror movie as well as a sci-fi movie. The characters are likable and believable. The creature is incredibly designed and to this day still holds up with all the CGI and all the advancements and special effects that have been done. The special effects that were done in this movie still come off as scary, creepy, and really intense. And when you talk about impact, the impact this movie has had on both sci-fi movies as well as horror movies, just the filmmakers and people in general that have been inspired to go on and do their own different creative ventures from watching this movie. It's right up there with Jaws with the impact that it's had on the film industry. So to me, if you're putting together a list like this of the best sci-fi horror movies, there is no doubt about it, Alien has gotta be on it. The Thing is a 1982 sci-fi horror movie, directed by John Carpenter and based on the 1938 John W. Campbell novella, Who Goes There? It stars Kurt Russell, Keith David, and Wilford Brimley. It tells the story of a group of American researchers in Antarctica who encounter a parasitic extraterrestrial life form.
I know I'm human. Some of you are still human. This thing doesn't want to show itself. It wants to hide inside an imitation.
So everything I've said up until this point on the list can pretty much be copied and pasted onto The Thing. It has everything. To me, this is one of the greatest, if not the greatest horror movies ever made. But it's also very much rooted in sci-fi, with this alien creature going around taking people's forms and killing everyone. But the way this shows the distrust between characters as they slowly start to discover that everybody could possibly be this creature, it's just handled so well. The pacing of this is probably John Carpenter's absolutely best movie when it comes to pacing. And on top of all that, the performances are incredible. This is my favorite performance from Kurt Russell. He is just such a badass, but really fun and interesting too. So is everybody else in this movie. But beyond all of that, the big creme de la creme thing, the thing you have to see this movie for, is the special effects. I don't think it's ever been done better when it comes to practical effects. The way the creature looks in all these different scenes, from the dog scene to the operation scene to the testing the blood scene, just so many iconic moments in this movie, and it's handled just so well. It's also the biggest head scratcher at how much this movie flopped and was hated when it was released. Because I think today, most horror fans, as well as sci-fi fans, would without a doubt put this as their number one or really high on their list of best ofs. So if I was making any other list but this one, The Thing would be my number one. The only reason it's not is because of the importance of the next film. But this movie is without a doubt sci-fi horror royalty. Frankenstein is a 1931 pre-code sci-fi horror movie, directed by James Whale and based on Mary Shelley's 1818 novel. It stars Boris Karloff, Colin Clive, and Mae Clarke. It's about Dr. Frankenstein, who dares to tamper with life and death by creating a human monster out of lifeless body parts.
It's alive! In the name of God, now I know what it feels like to be God.
So this is The Pioneer. This is the movie that began the sci-fi horror blending and really put it on this platform. So because of this film, you've seen so many horror movies come off of its lineage as well as sci-fi movies. It's incredible. But to this day, when you see sci-fi horror movies blended, it's this that really you can see all these fibers going back to. The way the story is structured, the way the creatures are shown, and there's just so many elements about this movie that hold strong to this day in all these different projects we've seen. Because I really think that if we had never had a Frankenstein, I don't think we would have a horror genre or sci-fi genre, not at least the way we know them to this day. Who knows, we may not have them, period, because I think this movie was just that impactful. It did so many things that were groundbreaking for the time, the way that it's shot, the makeup, design on Boris Karloff. It's just incredible. It still looks creepy, still looks disturbing, still off-putting, and yet fascinating at the same time. There's also so many iconic scenes and lines. It's fun, but yet it still gives you chills. It looks incredible, just the silvery black and white. This is just a gorgeously done movie. And I would argue that The Bride of Frankenstein, the sequel to this, is a better film. I'm not gonna lie and say that it's not. I really do think it's a better film. But because this came first, and because without this, there's so many things that wouldn't have happened. It's so inspirational, had such an impact in so many ways just on film in general, much less sci-fi and horror. So when I was putting this list together, I took into consideration the impact that a movie had, as well as how well it was done and how much I enjoyed it. And for me, all three of those things put Frankenstein as the greatest sci-fi horror movie of all time. Alright guys, that's going to do it for me today. Thank you so much for watching this. If you enjoyed this, do me a favor, hit the subscribe button and ding that little bell, because that is the best way to keep track of this channel and when I post videos like this, and I post videos like this every single week. I also want to give a huge, massive, enormous thank you to the Ghost Pirate crew, to you guys over on Patreon, and to the channel members over here. You guys absolutely mean the world to me. And if you would like to find out how you can become a part of the Patreon crew, there's a link down in the description. Or if you want to become a channel member, there's a button right down there that says join. And like always, thank you so much for watching. Please crush that like button. And remember guys, horror can be fun! If you enjoyed this, click right here to watch me recommend 10 brilliant movies over on Prime. And I'll see you guys next time!